"I'm a pilot" is a compulsive phrase uttered by most pilots at incredibly irrelevant times. Much like vegans, people who partake in CrossFit, or the car owner who puts his Instagram username on his car, pilots have always felt the impulsive need to tell people that they fly. Why? We're not 100% sure, but after many sleepless nights pondering this very question, we discovered that there's roughly 5 main types of pilot stereotypes out there. We think it's important to mention before we get started to remember that these are just stereotypes. We're not trying to be mean, as truthfully we're just as guilty of falling into some of these too. It's why these stereotypes exist. It's just always fun to poke fun at them, and that way, we don't start taking ourselves too seriously. So, without further ado, let's hop right in and give you the guide to spotting that guy at your local airfield. Let's start with some base stats that any pilot off the block has. First up, aviator glasses. Most may not even be aware, but these shades are literally taboo in any airline or flight deck. If you show up at the start of a trip wearing them, you'll immediately be placed in the "this guy is too cool for school" bracket. We get it. They're designed to be the most comfortable glasses to wear with head-throbbing headsets over your noggin, and being able to feel like Tom Cruise while flying your Cirrus is pretty great. But just remember that unless your Cirrus is equipped with a 50 cal, it just doesn't work to Top Gun standards. Moving on to the most common base stat, the next time you're on an airliner in the cabin, keep an eye out for the guy wearing his Bose A20s and 20A, tracking the flight on ForeFlight. It's likely this person also went to the flight deck and notified the crew that they have 1,000 hours in the PMDG 737, and if anything happens, hit him up. The final base stat is one you'll likely recognize at the next party you go to. Keep an eye out for the pilot who's wearing a polo with his airplane's registration number on the breast pocket. He'll likely be quick to bring up that he flies once you ask him what those weird letters mean on his shirt. At the end of the day, there's quite a bit of traits that all pilots have stereotype-wise. Let's go ahead and take a look at a more common one, the weekend warrior.
And Arlington traffic Cessna 27 Victor on a 25-mile straight-in final, 3-4, traffic permitting. Any traffic in the area, please advise. Arlington.
Sound familiar? Phew. Glad that's over with.
Blocked.
Oh wait,
With you.
it's not.
Meow.
He's got a stuck mic.
You're on guard.
But he doesn't. He's actually talking about his truck, just in case you're interested.
124.0 hot mic.
If you don't have balls unless you're fucking rolling coal, man.
And it's over. Anyways, let's take a look at the weekend warrior by first looking at occurrences on the ground before we get airborne with these guys. The first trait we've got for the weekend warrior can most commonly be seen while you're sitting outside eating your $100 hamburger. Picture it being a gorgeous, casual good eve, but right as you're about to take a bite of your hamburger, you hear someone in their Cirrus yell, "Clear prop!" Hold on tight to your burger because Hogwash over there is about to start his engine with the prop wash pointed right at your table at 4,000 RPM. In all seriousness, prop wash etiquette is never taught, and we really do wish it was. No one likes a tornado as a topping on their burger. Once the pilot has their plane started, if it's nighttime by now, you'll likely be blinded by their bright LED strobes that are on before they've even entered the runway. What's night vision for anyways? Once they've gone to take the runway and make their takeoff call that lasts longer than most marriages, you'll probably also notice that their pattern is the identical pattern flown by the bomber Fifi, a B-29, who visited the airport last week. Once they've exited the pattern, they'll make sure to navigate to their intended destination using not one, but 2 iPads, an iPhone, and 2 panel-mounted GPSs, all simultaneously.
Information overload.
To make matters worse, they're so overloaded with information that they don't even bother looking out the actual window while flying. We feel that it's also important to note that your iPad is not a fish finder. Finally, if you know a weekend warrior, then you'll know that you don't need to ever text them to see if they made it home safely. And just check Facebook. Before their prop even stopped spinning, they already made that same post about flying that they made last flight, and the flight before, and the flight before. You get the idea. They're being that guy. And that's all we got for the weekend warriors. And now, onto the elitists, or as we prefer to call them,
Machos.
aviate, navigate, and excommunicate?
Arlington traffic Cessna 27 Victor turning base to final, 3-4, Arlington.
Hey, Cessna 27 Victor, we're already on final. Thanks for cutting us off, man.
Recognize that guy? Look, getting cut off in the pattern sucks and is absolutely dangerous. However, don't clutter up the radios with your passive-aggressive, excommunicating, angry elf mentality.
Call me elf one more time.
He's an angry elf.
Keep it professional. Fly the airplane. Talk it out on the ground like a true diplomat. Another common macho you might run into is the old's cool pilot. Picture them at their local bar with their buddies complaining about the new young pilots being children of the magenta while explaining that they first learned to navigate by way of the stars, and they walked uphill to the airport and back through the snow. Or that tailwheel guy who walks up to the tricycle gear pilot on the ramp and says, "Your tailwheel's in the wrong spot." Some people don't prefer to fly a plane that's comparable to pushing a shopping cart backwards. It definitely does not make you a god, that's for sure. Let's get into one that's important to understand. Technique versus procedure. Procedure, land in your backwards shopping cart. Technique, land it on all the same wheels at one time. Technique 2, land it on the ones up front first, and then gently lower the back one to not wake up the toddler in the child seat. Both are perfectly acceptable ways of doing the same procedure, laying in the backward shopping cart. But regardless, don't let Terry tell you how to fly your backward shopping cart. Different approaches to the same thing is what makes the world go around. Stay modest, folks. Finally, there's always going to be the humble bragger who casually mentions how many hours he has in conversation around pilots. Believe it or not, these folks really do exist. That's all we've got for the
Machos.
Don't be that guy. Next up, the Warbird pilot. Believe it or not, but the most common place you'll find a Warbird pilot isn't in flight. It's more than likely going to be at the SOS Bros tent at Oshkosh. Folks ranging from those interested in aviation up through full-on astronauts or, hey, even celebrities who land on taxiways, they'll probably be at this tent. However, the attendee who's the easiest to spot in these festivities is the Warbird pilot. How can you tell who they are? Well, just look for the guy who's in a flight suit at a bar. Leave him in the airplane, folks. Another thing to be aware of is that when it comes to fly-in camping-style air shows, don't bother setting an alarm clock. 6 a.m. is wheels up time for the Flight Sim X Squadron, and that Rolls-Royce Merlin will be the best alarm clock you've ever heard. Finally, always remember, regardless of the type of plane you fly, stay humble. Everyone's shit smells the same. That's all I got for the Warbird folk. Now onto our favorite bracket of stereotypes. Let's finalize all these stereotypes with the social media pilot. There's that person on any Facebook flying group who seems to always think that they need to comment with their opinion on your post. They seem to think you didn't flare properly, or you broke a regulation, or even worse, they don't even tell you and they just report you to the FAA anyways for something that clearly wasn't even a violation. Grab your tape measure, folks, because that sure looks closer than 500 feet below the cloud to
Armchair FAA investigator.
Finally, our most favorite, when someone makes a post on their own personal account saying,
I just flew a flight from Kawo to Kapi.
how could they expect anyone to understand what KWO means? Ah, great. More acronyms. Just spell out the airport. Your friends on Facebook aren't a GPS unit. Ultimately, the social media pilot tends to look at every flight through a lens rather than their own eyes. We've all been guilty of some of these at one time or another, but, there's a time and place for everything. Finally, it's important to remember that with any social media account, what you see isn't necessarily exactly how their life is going. This same thing applies to all pilots. Remember that with these stereotypes we've been laying out, you shouldn't paint everyone with the same brush. Not all pilots do these things. We sure hope they don't. It's honestly just fun to lay them all out and tease our fellow backwards shopping cart drivers. Ultimately, the biggest reason these stereotypes exist in the first place is because a lot of pilots seem to think that they are a self-proclaimed god. In reality, anyone with a heartbeat, motivation, some pennies, and time can become a pilot. Always remember that. Don't take yourself too seriously. Did I mention I'm a pilot? Anyways, that's all I've got for this video. If you enjoyed it, we've got to be that guy and ask you to go ahead and hit the like button. Or if you want to prove that you have 1,000 hours in FSX, maybe even hit that subscribe button. It really is the only way to prove it.
And
Remember, don't be that guy. We'll see you again next week with a new upload.